I think one of the biggest changes, particularly in the European context, is the impact of migration, inward migration into Europe, which has provided both opportunities and challenges for Europeans. From the perspective of opportunities, it's meant that people have come to Europe from countries which have been traditionally resistant to the Christian gospel, or where there are very few believers. So over the last 10 years particularly, we've seen a large number of Afghans becoming believers. Only recently I talked with someone from a Baptist church in Austria who told me that the previous Sunday they had baptized 25 Afghans in his church. I asked him how many people were in the church normally. He said about 100, 110 people. So I was shocked by that, because 30 years ago there were only 25 known Afghan believers in the world. The other factor is that we're seeing continue to see a lot of Iranians professing faith in Christ, both in Iran and as migrants into Europe. Now this is a longer term impact issuing out of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. But there are perhaps now 1 million Iranian believers in the world. It may be the fastest growing church in the world, some people argue. In addition, we're seeing people come from North Africa into Europe, and a growing number of people from Muslim backgrounds in North Africa who are professing faith, some of whom are returning to their countries and bearing witness to Christ there. Algeria would be a case in point. In the year 2000, there were maybe 200 Algerian believers in Algeria. Today there are at least 80,000, so something special is going on there. Some of these people have become believers in Europe, taking the gospel back to Algeria. On the other side, we've seen the influx of large numbers of people from Muslim backgrounds into Europe, and it seems to me this is going to contribute to greater clashes between Western values and Islamic values, because many of the Muslims coming into Europe are not necessarily integrating very well, and often are resistant to or disdainful of Western values, some of which Western Christians are also feel negatively about, like pornography, free sex outside committed marital relations, and so on. But I think this is going to create increasing tensions in the future. Perhaps 5-6 million Muslims in France, at least 3 million Muslims in Britain, numbers increasing, same in Germany, and I think the tensions will rise in time in these countries and could lead to civil unrest or even worse. So I think this is one of the challenges facing us. In the early 1990s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, an American academic of Japanese origin, Francis Fukuyama, wrote a book called The End of History, in which he argued history is over, Western democracy has won with the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was a naive argument, though he became a millionaire from writing the book. And I think what we've discovered since is that there was no substance to that argument. A subsequent book was written by Huntington, which he entitled The Clash of Civilizations, and he foresaw the clash between the rise of Islam and Western values. And I think we're seeing that played out today, and we don't know what the end game is yet. The other development in the last 8-10 years is the Arab Spring and the changes in the Middle East and North Africa. That has had both positive and negative implications. It opened the door for the advance of the gospel, as I mentioned, in Algeria, but also Tunisia, where there were only about 25 known believers in the year 2000. There are perhaps 700-800 believers there now. Also in Kurdistan, which was part of Iraq. So some countries have seen more people come to faith as a result of the turmoil in the Middle East. In some other countries, however, the church is more restricted. It's been a negative influence on the advance of the gospel. So the Palestinian territories now, there are much fewer believers because of migration. The church has shrunk by 80% in Iraq, and there's no signs really of any significant growth, for example, in Libya and some of the Gulf states. Having said that, with the impact of radio and television ministry particularly, there do seem to be increasing pockets or numbers of Muslims professing faith in the Middle East and amongst those who are living in Europe. It's not revival, but we're seeing more than we have for a long time before in terms of the numbers of Muslims turning to Christ. I think the other thing is that we're seeing a crisis politically in the Western world amongst millennials, a loss of confidence in central government, political leaders. Authenticity is a very important value for young people born in the last 25, 30 years. And there's a crisis of authority in the European context, with all the consequences that brings in terms of loss of trust in central political authorities, central government, movements towards separation within countries. You've seen some of that here in Spain. We've seen it in the UK. I think it'll happen in other places too. And that's all a reflection of the crisis of authority in a European context. As far as the universities are concerned, where I'm working principally, we're not seeing a revival, but we are seeing what I would call a restlessness amongst many students. The dominant attitude towards the Christian faith is still apathetic, one of apathy, but increasing numbers of students are intrigued by the person of Jesus Christ, and often those born in the last 25 years have no knowledge of him or the scriptures at all, so often they're more intrigued to discuss who he is and what he's done. We're finding, therefore, a bit more openness in many universities all across the continent. Der Stern, a German magazine a few years ago, did a survey amongst European young people under 25 years of age about religious beliefs, and their front page of the magazine, in which they gave the results of the survey, just read, "Why are so many young Europeans disillusioned with the church but fascinated by the person of Jesus Christ?" I think that sums up where we are in Europe today as far as young people are concerned.